Welcome to the part of our timeline where we start looking at the text. This is going to be not quite as lengthy as the last little part that we were going through, but we are going to look at several different pieces, and it will probably take 3 or 4 segments to go through, and then we are going to really get into the book of Luke. So as we look at the text, let us go back to our first slide that we've been looking at and using, and that is the temple events. Here's that slide. In our previous segments, we were looking at the 6 men who really helped develop this concept of the Bible. Now, I talked about King Cyrus and Alexander the Great, and I call them to the fore and say that they have an influence on the Bible because of the way in which the languages unfold throughout history. And then the rabbis of Rabbi Hillel, Rabbi Shammai, and Rabbi Yeshua, and then this Marcion of Sinope. These people are influential in what happens to the text. So we are going to go in and let's put our men on our timeline again, and let's look at the timeline with these men. Let's see where they sit all together on the timeline. Now what's important is what I'm going to show you in our next slide. The Hebrew text, the Aramaic portion of the Tanakh or the Old Testament, and the Greek translation of all of that information is going to be influenced on the first 5 men. So let's put a box around all of those men, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about the text. Here is that slide. What that slide demonstrates is that from King Cyrus all the way down to Rabbi Yeshua, here's the text that influences all of the Jews at that time period. The Hebrew, the Aramaic, and the Greek translation of the Hebrew and Aramaic, and Jesus and Rabbi Hillel and Rabbi Shammai, even Rabbi Saul, who we call the Apostle Paul, is working with this text. All of these men are aware of this text. Now, if you go back to King Cyrus, of course, he's not aware of a translation of Greek because he lives prior to that. But this is the textual context for Jesus and the apostles. So when we go into this, this is very important to us and our history. So what we have is that Jesus is aware of the Hebrew, he is aware of the Aramaic, and possibly aware of the Greek translation of that information. So this is what's handed down to these people at that time period. Now if you notice with that box, the box stops right here with Jesus, and Marcion of Sinope sits way over here. Now that's very important because Marcion sits outside of this box, contents. Now I'm not trying to put these people in a box, but what we need to understand is that these men worked with a certain piece of information that is unique. And when we're studying the church back through history, we have to see all of these pieces. So the Bible itself, what's called the Tanakh, was in development up through Jesus. Believe it or not, the text itself was not really truly made a complete Hebrew canon until sometime after Jesus. There's a lot of information that goes into that, and it goes well past our discussion here. But it's important that when you look at Jesus back to Alexander the Great and King Cyrus, his text that Jesus is working with is significantly different than what happens after Jesus. Now, we're looking at history, we're looking at the church, we're looking at the foundation. And we are concerned about what Jesus understood, what the apostles had as their text, and what flows out of that information. And in our next segments, we're going to be looking at information about the New Testament, we're going to be looking at things about the Mishnah, and we're going to be looking at the canonization process to a certain degree and to a small detail of the New Testament itself, and it's going to happen a little bit later. But I invite you to join us on those segments.